Hi, so my name is Lori, and this is my second video that I'm doing that have to do with uh, youth and suicide, depression, and also to do with a group called A Human Project. And I am doing this, my last video was more towards the adults and explaining why I'm so involved with this program. Um, but tonight I want to speak more to the youth. I want to tell my story of my depression, um, which also started when I was a young teenager, in hopes that perhaps you could learn from my mistakes, perhaps. Maybe they weren't mistakes, but I look back now and wish I had either done something differently or felt more comfortable to do something, to talk to someone, or just to do it differently than I did do it. Um, but so here I go. I'm going to just tell a little bit more about my story. And I'm not going to go into all the different things that I went through, with the exception of the first event that I believe is what started um, the depression, or at least led to it. And then other things probably worsened it. But um, I'll just talk a little bit about that first event that led to it. But I want to focus on what I did, what I didn't do, and what it led to in my life, even to my adult life, because of choices that I made or didn't make. So my story begins when I was 13 years old. That was at least that's the first event that happened um, to me that I believe led to the depression. And that was a summer that I spent with my aunt and uncle, my cousins. And it was for the summer. It was a big deal because I was 13. I'd never uh, flown by myself before, and I was flying from Hawaii to Seattle, and so it was a big deal. I was flying by myself, and I was going there for the summer to take care of my cousins, my two younger cousins, while my aunt and uncle worked throughout the summer. And it was just a treat for me um, to be able to do this. What I didn't expect was um, my uncle. Um, he sexually molested me over and over again while I was there. And well, a couple of things happened. One, I felt really guilty. I felt like a lot of it was my fault. Um, I felt like maybe I had led him on, even though I was only 13 years old. Um, but prior to the first night, him coming into my bed, um, he had asked me several questions. I had told him that I had a boyfriend back home, and realistically, it was a friend, a guy friend that I liked, but I was 13. I wasn't dating yet. Um, but I was also, at that age, I exaggerated. And all the, kids at school were saying what they had done and what they hadn't done. And so my uncle asked me, and I said, yeah, I had a boyfriend. And he asked me how far we had gone with each other. And I exaggerated that as well. And so the next night he came into my room, and I remember laying there thinking, oh my gosh, if I had just not exaggerated about having a boyfriend, and about going as far as I had said we'd gone. Maybe he wouldn't have come in the room. Maybe he came in because I said those things, and so I felt really guilty about the whole thing. I also tried to ask my dad if I could come home, and but without telling him the reason, and that didn't go over too well. Between the commitment he had made with my aunt and uncle for me to be there, to be their babysitter, and the extra cost, the cost that went into the plane tickets and whatnot, the answer was no, I wasn't coming home early. And so it just happened night after night. And I, when I did go home, I, one, I felt guilty. Two, I didn't know that if people would believe me. I figured if they ever asked my uncle, he would deny it. So I buried it deeply inside of me. I didn't say anything. I got back into my daily life, and I led what I would call a normal life for about a year, and then I started acting out. I started just going downhill. It started with small things, skipping school, but then I started sneaking out of the house at night, being picked up by uh, guys who were older than me and were driving, and I became very promiscuous at a young age. Started drinking. At some point, started doing drugs. Um, then I became suicidal, or I started thinking about suicide. I didn't at that point hadn't tried to kill myself, um, but I was going downhill quickly, and so all this time I still not only didn't talk about what happened that summer, but I started forgetting about it. I didn't ever want to think about it, and I didn't think about it. I would think of anything but that. Um, but at the same time, my life was spiraling down. And looking back, I'm sure that one thing had to do with the other, because I didn't ever deal with the rape, because I didn't tell anyone, I didn't um, think about it myself. I just pushed it down and down and down, and it came out of me in a negative ways. And then I got married, and when I got pregnant with my first child, I stopped the drugs and the drinking 100%, and that's a good thing. Um, that maternal instinct kicked in, and I knew I had to do that to have a healthy child. However, when I did that, I still had the depression inside of me, and I had no way of coping with it because the drugs and the alcohol were my coping mechanisms. And so those thoughts of depression and the thoughts of suicide, what start before I started attempting the suicide, I started cutting. And then the cutting wasn't enough, and I started thinking of different ways to harm myself. And then it got to the point that I was harming myself, and I was uh, trying to kill myself. And I would then end up in the hospital. I would get some therapy. I would get out of the hospital. We had dealt with the suicide. They keep you in the hospital until they are pretty confident you're not going to kill yourself or try and kill yourself. But we didn't deal with the cutting. So I would start cutting all the time. And it wouldn't be but months before something would happen and my depression would go down. And I mean, it would increase and I would go down and I would try and kill myself again. And I'd be back in the hospital. And the third or fourth time of this cycle, when I went into the hospital, I realized I cannot keep doing this. The depression was not being taken care of. I was in the hospital until they could stabilize me. They would release me. I would cut. Something in life would happen and trigger the depression to get even worse. I would try and kill myself. I would be back in the hospital. And so that last time I said to myself, I committed to myself, this won't happen again. I won't be back in the hospital. Either I need to find a way to treat and fix the depression, or the next time I think of suicide, I'm just going to have to find a way where I can just make it work. And up to that point, I don't think I wanted to kill myself up till that point because I thought I still had hope that in the hospital, somehow, somewhere, some doctor, some nurse, something would fix me. And every time I would leave the hospital, I'd realize I wasn't fixed. The depression was definitely still there. So that last time I knew that that was the first time I really wanted to die. I was praying, and I wasn't. I didn't believe or not believe in a God. I didn't go to church, but I remember just literally praying, Lord, if there's a God, if you're real, take me. Just take me. My kids would be better off without me. I would, I wouldn't be feeling all this pain all the time. No one would miss me. Just take me. Let me die. And in that hospital stay, I decided, I made a deal with myself. The only thing I had not tried yet was going to church. And I grew up not going to church. So that wasn't a part of my life. But I kept remembering my grandmother had a pendant she wore. And she gave it to me quite a while before this happened. And it said, try God. And I just kept the pendant because it reminded me of my grandmother. And while I was in the hospital, I said, I'm going to try it. I'm going to find a church. If there's a God, He'll fix me. If not, I'm going to kill myself. It was one or the other. And that's just the deal that I made with myself, the commitment I made to myself. And while I was there in the hospital, I called a church that I pass by every day to and from work. And so I knew nothing about them except for it was a big church on the road that I drove to work on. And I called them and asked if they had a pastor, a counselor, someone who might be willing to come to the hospital. And I was so embarrassed because I thought, I'm telling them that I'm in a psychiatric ward of a hospital. I mean, that's just for crazy people. And I didn't feel crazy. I felt depressed. But I thought, they're going to think I'm crazy. And But a couple of the counselors, one counselor and a pastor, came that day to talk to me, and then later that evening, two women from the church came, brought me some books, talked to me, and when I got out of the hospital, they followed up with me, so I went to the church, and I, I didn't know if there was a God or not, like I said, but I was open, and basically it was a test. I would never say test God, but at the time, I was testing him. It was either fix me and I'll believe that there's a God. If I become suicidal again, there's no God, and I'm going to kill myself. And that was 20 some years ago. And once I got out, I got back into therapy, outpatient therapy, and was on some medication just like every other time. Um, but this time it stuck. And I've been medication free and therapy free for over 20 years now. And I can't say I don't have some dark days, but I've learned some healthier ways of dealing um, with any sadness that comes my way, of getting back into my happy place. Um, but what I would, from that story, from my life lessons, I, my first thought of depression, of suicide, was at 15. The first incident that happened to me was at 13. And like I said, I went downhill. And if I had to do it over again, if I could go back to those days, I would tell myself to first to tell someone, I I wish I had had someone that I felt comfortable and safe telling. I didn't think my parents would believe me because it was my uncle. I probably would have thought my mom would believe me, but my dad overpowered everyone in the house. And I didn't think my dad would believe me. And I didn't want him mad at me. And whether these are realistic thoughts or not, I don't know. But to a 13-year-old, it was. Um, I wish I had someone. It didn't even need to be a family member. But if I had had someone that I trusted, that I could tell them what happened and trust that they would have believed me and listened to me, I wish that's what had happened. If I had gotten it out of my system instead of burying it as deep as I did, it wouldn't have, I don't think it would have followed me into my adulthood. I think I could have gotten therapy for that one incident. It may have been a lot of therapy. It may have not have been easy, but I think I would have been okay. Now, there's no way for me to know that, but I do know that there was a direct connection between the rape and all my negative behaviors. Um, I'm sure it had a lot to do, everything to do with, um, my excuse me, promiscuous ways. Um, when I was 15, 16, and if I had been dealing with it better, or at all, because I didn't deal with it at all, um, I think things would have been a lot different. And I lost a lot of my kids' younger years with me going in and out of the hospitals. And even when I was home, I was so depressed that a lot of the attention wasn't on them like it should have been. Um, so, what I would say to anyone, if you're hearing this, seeing this, you're going to also know about and hear about A Human Project. They are there to not just listen, they are there to listen and believe you and work through things with you and help you to love yourself and not blame yourself. Um, they also have, connections to the various different suicide groups and hotlines and whatnot. Um, they can, get that information, whatever state you're in, whatever country you're in, they can help you with that, finding you help where you're at. And they have a great youth program where the youth who are in the same situation work with each other, talk with each other, bond, and and work through a program online. And then there are times that they get together, and there's just a lot that they have to offer. But the most important is they will listen, they will believe you, and if you think you can't tell anyone, you're afraid that you just don't even want to speak it, say the words, because it'll make it real then. Um, it might feel better if you just bury it, just don't talk about it, because then you don't have to deal with it. I know that first step is really hard, really scary. Um, the best way I can explain it is you think that if you speak the words, it then makes it true, versus if you keep it bottled up, you don't have to admit that it really happened. You can just kind of forget about it, try and forget about it, but it'll come out in other ways. Um, you may think you're forgetting about it, but it'll come out when, like in my case, it came out in some really negative ways. So I hope that somebody has gotten something from this. Um, there is, like I said, a human project. That's at www.ahumanproject.com. There's a lot of information there. You can connect with them and and find out how what help they can get you. It's not worth it to keep it bottled up inside, even though it feels like it is. It's not worth it. You want to be able to have a childhood, a youth that you can enjoy, and an adulthood that you can enjoy, and you don't want to be just spiraling down. So once again, my name is Lori, and I hope this has touched someone out there. And um, that's it for tonight. Have a good night, everyone.